The federal government is hiding emissions cap impact analysis. Records relating to, quote, cost-benefit analysis, costing or study, including but not limited to job loss or investment loss in the oil and gas industry in Canada on the Liberals' 42% emissions reduction were withheld from a reply to an inquiry of the Environment Ministry. On that emissions cap, Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta has called it a cap on production and an intentional attack on Albertans.
There's no question that if they continue on this path, it will end up with court. And I think we will win. We have now seen the federal government lose 2 cases at the federal court level because they continue to use their jurisdiction as a pretext to invade ours. This is not cooperative federalism. I would ask them to read the court decisions again. You do not come to an international conference and then drop 2 unilateral policies in our jurisdiction out of the blue without getting our agreement. That is what they essentially did this past week. It's unacceptable and it's unprofessional. And so, yes, I think that that's where this is headed. But in the meantime, we're going to make sure that they do not damage the investment climate that we have in Alberta. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that we put up a shield so that we continue to attract the investment that we know we need to be able to meet our emissions reduction targets.
Smith even told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau she would resist that attack on Albertans right to his face, and Trudeau just sat there and took it, while an intelligent woman told him exactly why he was wrong and a failure. Remember this?
The Prime Minister saying that we'd like to bring our emissions reduction and energy development plan with a target of carbon neutrality by 2050 in alignment with some of the objectives of the federal government. And that will require us to have some conversations about 3 areas that I don't think we have agreement on yet, but I hope to. We would like to establish a working group so that we could talk about how we might be able to achieve a net zero power grid, but I've indicated to the Prime Minister that that is not possible by 2035, which is the federal target. We've been told that by our experts here. We also know that an emissions cap or emissions reduction, such as the one that's been proposed of 42% by 2030, would also result in essentially a production cap, which we don't think is realistic or feasible as well. And we know that the government had negotiated Article 6 into the Paris Climate Accord, which should allow for us to get a credit here for reducing emissions abroad. And we would like to be able to work with our partner in British Columbia and the government in order to be able to reduce emissions and get credit here through LNG export.
The Liberals obviously have grandiose schemes to rewrite the economy, and they say they can do that without destroying the economy. However, you would think they would put up the data to prove it, but they aren't, because I suspect the data does not show what they claim it does. Here's why. An inquiry of the Environment Ministry was made by Conservative MP for Regina Wascana, Michael Cram. That inquiry asked, with regard to the regulatory framework for an oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions cap, has any department, agency, Crown Corporation, or entity conducted a cost-benefit analysis, costing, or study, including but not limited to job loss, investment in the oil and gas industry in Canada, oil and natural gas production in Canada, or devaluing retirement funds, and what supporting documents exist regarding this analysis? The reply from the federal government: well, they've got the records, but they are not going to be showing them anytime soon.
The NDP Trudeau carbon tax on the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who ships the food is a tax on all who buy the food. Now they want to quadruple the tax. I'm Pierre Poilievre. I'll axe the tax so you pay less and bring home more.
Look at this. An initial analysis of potential impacts on employment, investment, and production within Canada's oil and gas sector was developed to inform government decisions that informed the proposed approach outlined in the regulatory framework for an oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions cap. The supporting documents are not available for release. Wonder why that is. The impact analysis will be further developed through the regulatory process. The impacts of the policy will be assessed as part of the regulatory process and published in the draft regulatory impact analysis statement when draft regulations are published in 2024. The Liberals can treat the House of Commons with contempt to hide the failings of their bad ideas. This is nothing new, but we really don't need federal data to tell us why a cap on emissions is bad for the oil and gas sector and will kill well-paying Western jobs. The Business Council of Canada is sounding the alarm bells too. Look at this. The Business Council of Canada has issued a letter to key deputy ministers in charge of implementing the Liberal government's cap on, as I like to describe it, Western jobs. Michael Gullo, the council's vice president of policy, wrote, "Imposing an emissions cap will likely force operators to voluntarily curtail their production." Of course it would. This would effectively reduce the overall capacity of the most productive segment of Canada's economy at a time when investment and growth is desperately needed. Some of Canada's most reputable economists believe that an emissions cap would exacerbate the country's inflation and affordability problems when applying a broad-based economic shock that will reduce tax revenues and add pressure to the federal deficit. So the Liberals can hide their data, which shows Smith and the Business Council are completely right, but that's okay because, as always, Alberta's ready to rumble.
Singling out the oil and gas sector alone for punitive federal treatment, Justin Trudeau and his eco-extremist Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, are risking hundreds of billions of dollars in investment in Alberta's and Canada's economy and core social programs. They're devaluing the retirement investments of millions of Canadians, and they're threatening the jobs of hundreds of thousands of Albertans. And ironically, they're also significantly undercutting global emissions reduction efforts by effectively de-incentivizing capital investment by the oil and gas sector in the emissions-reducing technologies and fuels that the world needs Alberta to develop and share. This proposed cap also undermines the unity of our country, and Albertans will not tolerate it. Our province is simply done with what amounts to a steady stream of economic sanctions and punitive measures thrown upon our citizens and businesses to intentionally damage their livelihoods and the economic engine that disproportionately powers our national economy and the programs that Canadians rely on. So over the coming months, our cabinet and our caucus will develop constitutional shields in response to this and other recent attacks on our province by what is fast becoming one of the most damaging federal administrations in Canadian history. Alberta will continue to implement our emissions reduction and energy development plan to achieve a carbon neutral economy by 2050 through a combination of investments in emission reducing technologies combined with practical emission offsets, all while continuing to develop Alberta's world-class natural energy resources for Canada and for the world. The federal government must stay out of our province's constitutional jurisdiction and instead work with us to align our emissions reduction efforts with our effective Made in Alberta plan. We have been working with them for the last several months on that effort, and we hope with this statement that they will now take us up on that offer and withdraw this proposal.
With all these recent court victories against Trudeau, for example, the No Pipelines Bill, C-69 being struck down, and the plastics ban being struck down too, Albertans are not tired of seeing Trudeau and his big green reset lose in court. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. The emissions cap is a curtailment on production, but it's also a curtailment on Western jobs and a curtailment on the economy. To sign the petition against the Liberal government's plan to rewrite the economy in favor of disastrous green ideas, please go to nogreenreset.com.